On the third day of my honeymoon, my husband sold my body to my own father for 1,000,000 reais in cruzeiros at the time. The two of them toasted with champagne while I cried locked in the room. Revenge came in the form of a check that they didn't know I had kept. Good afternoon, my dear viewers. This is Adeline Montgomery Wells, 72 years young, coming to you from my little home in Pensacola, Florida, where the Gulf waters are so blue they look like a piece of heaven fallen to earth. I was born in a small town in Georgia, along the banks of the Chattahoochee River, but today I live here in Pensacola, where I wake up every morning to the sound of waves and thank God for another day of life. Just this morning, before I started recording this video, I was sitting on my porch with a nice hot cup of coffee, looking out at the beach. My house isn't big, but from here I can see the ocean, and that's a blessing to me. I have all my little plants on the porch, my basil, mint, rosemary, all so fragrant. When the sea breeze mixes with the smell of the herbs, it feels like everything's right in the world. What I enjoy most these days is crocheting and selling my little pieces at a local market nearby. I make doilies, colorful rugs, bathroom sets, all with those stitches I learned from my grandmother way back when. Each piece I make, I put a little piece of my story into it, And people like them, especially the tourists who visit Pensacola, they take a little piece of Florida home in these colorful threads. I started crocheting when I was a young girl, but I only took it seriously after I turned 50. Before that, life was too hectic. After everything happened, crocheting became my therapy. Each little stitch was like sewing back together the pieces of my soul. Today, the money I earn helps supplement my retirement, but I do it more for the pleasure of creating with my own hands. Here, where I'm recording, is my special little corner. I have some old photos on the wall from the time when the world was in black and white, as my granddaughter used to say. Over there in the corner is the frame with her college graduation photo, the first in our family. Next to it is that wooden table my neighbor Mr. Albert made for me. That's where I put my little radio to listen to country music programs and the morning news. Oh, my dears, before I start telling my story, I'd like to ask you for one little thing. If you can, please click that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps this old lady continue telling her stories and maybe help someone who's going through a difficult time, similar to what I went through. And you, my dear viewers watching right now, tell me in the comments, what town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with your coffee, after lunch, or late at night when your body is tired, but your mind still wants a little conversation? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of kindness. Today I'm going to tell you a story that for a long time I kept inside, like a thorn embedded in my heart. It's about how sometimes we trust the wrong people, those who say they love us, but who actually only see us as merchandise. My story isn't easy to hear, nor was it easy to live, but I survived to tell it, and perhaps it can help someone who's going through something similar. It all started many years ago, when I was a young girl full of dreams, the daughter of a powerful man who treated me like I was a precious jewel. Little did I know that jewels can be sold. I was born in a small town in Georgia, on the banks of the Chattahoochee River, in a time when life seemed simpler, but wasn't always, My father, Ezekiel Montgomery, owned 2 cotton plantations and half the land in those parts. He was a man who, when he entered a room, everyone noticed. Tall, always in a well-pressed suit even in the Georgia heat, and with a way of talking that made people quiet down to listen. My mother, Eliza, was the opposite. Tiny, spoke softly, lived in my father's shadow. She came from a traditional family too, but after she got married, she seemed to wither like a flower without water. Today I understand she lived in fear, but back then I just thought that was her way. I have 2 strong memories of her, the lavender scent she wore and her hands always busy with embroidery. We lived in a big house, one of those old plantation houses with a porch all the way around, floorboards that creaked when we stepped on them, and a yard so big that my brother and I could play hide-and-seek without ever using the same hiding place twice. My brother Thomas was 3 years older than me. He was my father's pride and joy, the heir who would take over the business. From a young age, my father would take him to see the plantations, while I stayed at home, learning to be a proper lady. Our house had a huge parlor where my father would entertain important friends from the region, politicians, other plantation owners, big shots. On these days, my mother would be nervous from early morning, checking that everything was perfect. The dining room table, which we only used on these occasions, was solid mahogany and so long that 20 people could sit at it. The silverware was sterling that my mother kept in a red velvet box and only took out for these occasions. When I was a little girl, around 7, my fun was playing with the daughters of Martha, our cook. Sarah and Betty were my companions every afternoon. We would run through the orchard, climb peach trees, and play with cloth dolls that Martha made for us. But that didn't last long. One day my father saw us playing and gave me a terrible scolding. "Adeline will not mix with the help's children," he said, as if it were a mortal sin. The next day, I was enrolled in St. Mary's Academy, a boarding school just for girls from wealthy families. At the boarding school, I learned to walk with straight posture with a book on my head, to speak French, to play piano, and to embroider as well as my mother. The nuns were strict, but I actually liked it there. My best friend was Caroline Whitaker, daughter of a judge from Savannah. On weekends, when we went home, it was nothing but joy. Caroline taught me to dance in secret from the nuns and to read novels that weren't in the school library. Saturdays at home were always the same, my father sitting on the porch, reading the newspaper and smoking a cigar, while my mother embroidered quietly beside him. Thomas and I had to stay nearby, spending time as a family, as my father put it. But we couldn't make noise or interrupt his reading. It was a heavy silence that only broke when a visitor arrived. I had a porcelain doll, a gift from my father when I turned 10. She was beautiful, with a lace dress and patent leather shoes. "This doll is special like you, Adeline dear. Take good care of her," he would say. But I couldn't really play with her, just look at her and arrange her little dress. She sat on a high shelf in my room. Years later, I understood that doll was like me, beautiful to look at, but with no life of her own. My father controlled everything at home, what we ate, the clothes we wore, who could visit us. I remember once when a school friend, Mary, came to our house. She was on scholarship, a teacher's daughter. My father treated her with such coldness that the poor girl never came back. "I don't want those people here," he said afterward. "You deserve better friendships, my princess." Back then, I thought that was care, that my father only wanted the best for me. When he called me my princess, my rare jewel, I felt special. I didn't realize he was turning me into an object of value, something he could display when he wanted to impress visitors. On Sundays, we all went to Mass at St. John's Episcopal Church. My father insisted the whole family be impeccable. It was the day when all of Charleston society met, and he wanted to show that the Montgomerys were the perfect family example. After church, he always talked with the mayor, the sheriff, with other important men. Mother smiled and nodded, but hardly spoke. The food at our house was plentiful, but without extravagance. My father liked country ham with grits, boiled sweet potatoes, and that cucumber salad with red onion that only Martha knew how to make just the way he liked it. On feast days, there was shrimp and grits, Brunswick stew, peach cobbler. The smell of that food still comes to my memory as if I were smelling it right now. When I was about 12, I started noticing strange things. Sometimes my father would bring important men to dinner and always told me to put on my prettiest dress and stay at the table with them. "Show how well educated you are, Adeline," he would say. And I obeyed, of course. Sat all prim and proper, answered their questions, played piano after dinner if they asked. The men would look at me in a way that made me uncomfortable, but my father seemed to like it. It was around this time that I noticed how my father changed when the subject was me. With my brother Thomas, he was stern but straightforward. You need to be a man, face difficulties, he would say. With me, it was different. My little princess doesn't need to worry about anything. Daddy will solve everything, he would say, always hugging me in a way that made me uncomfortable. At 13, my body started to change, and my father became even more controlling. I couldn't wear certain dresses anymore, couldn't talk alone with any boy, not even with his friends' sons. No man will come near my precious jewel without my permission, he would say, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for a father to talk that way about his own daughter. And that's how I grew up, between the walls of the mansion in Georgia and the walls of the boarding school, thinking that the world was just that. A girl who didn't know freedom, but also didn't know it existed, like a little bird born in a cage that thinks flying is just hopping from perch to perch. I only understood how strange it all was when I turned 17 and returned home after graduating from school. The world was changing out there. It was the early 70s, but inside our house, time seemed to stand still. And it was during this time that everything started to change, when my father announced it was time to prepare me for the future he had planned for me. When I returned home after graduating from school, I thought my life would change a little. Maybe I could help with the administration of my father's business, like my brother Thomas did. I had even learned basic accounting from the nuns. But I soon saw that the plans for my future were very different. It was March 1970. I remember it like it was yesterday. My father organized a dinner to celebrate my graduation. "I'm going to introduce my princess to society," he said, all proud. The parlor of our house was decorated with flowers of all kinds, jasmine, white roses, orchids. The smell was so strong it gave me a headache. At that dinner, my father invited all the important men of Georgia, the governor, congressmen, big plantation owners, cotton mill owners like him. Each brought his impeccably dressed wife and, in some cases, their sons, young men in their early 20s, all well-groomed, as my mother would say. I was wearing a light blue dress made especially for the occasion. My father hired a famous dressmaker from Atlanta to make it. It was beautiful, but made me uncomfortable, so tight I could hardly breathe properly. My hair was in an elaborate updo that took 2 hours to do, and my mother lent me a pearl necklace that had been given to her by her own mother. "Today you're no longer a girl, Adeline," my father told me as he adjusted the necklace around my neck. "It's time to think about your future, and I already have big plans for you." During dinner, I realized that my father was showing me off as if I were a trophy. He would call me to stand beside him while he talked with the guests, always with his hand on my waist, in a possessive way. "My Adeline is accomplished," he would say, "plays piano like an angel, embroiders like no one else, and has the education that only the Sisters of St. Mary's know how to give." It was at this dinner that I met Richard Harrington. He was different from the other young men. He wasn't a plantation owner's or politician's son, but a young administrator who worked for my father, managing one of the cotton mills. He was 27, with well-trimmed black hair, and a smile that seemed sincere. He was handsome, you know. Not in that flashy way, but with a subtle charm that caught attention. "Miss Adeline," he greeted me, kissing my hand as if we were in a movie. "Your father talks about you so much that I felt I knew you even before this moment." Unlike the older men who looked at me in a way that made me uncomfortable, Richard looked into my eyes when he spoke to me. He asked me about the books I liked to read, about music, about my dreams. No one had ever asked me about my dreams before. "I would like to study more," I confessed to him at a moment when we were a bit away from the other guests. "Maybe even go to university." "It's a noble dream," he replied. "Knowledge is something no one can take from us." That night, I couldn't sleep properly. I kept thinking about Richard, about the way he had treated me, like a person, not like a doll or a trophy. The next morning, during breakfast, my father seemed especially satisfied. "What did you think of Richard, Adeline?" he asked, feigning casualness. "He seems to be well-mannered," I answered, trying not to show too much interest. "He's more than well-mannered. He's brilliant in business. Started as an accountant at the mill, and in 2 years was already managing everything. He has a future." A week after that dinner, Richard started appearing at our house frequently. He always came to discuss business with my father, but somehow ended up dining with us or having afternoon tea on the porch, and he always managed to chat with me for a few minutes. I remember one day when he brought a book of poetry by Walt Whitman. "I thought you might like it," he said, discreetly handing me the book when my father was distracted. "It's about the beauty of America and our rivers. I thought it might interest you, since you love the river so much." That gesture touched me deeply. No one besides my friend Caroline knew about my love for literature. At home, I hid my books, because my father thought proper ladies shouldn't occupy themselves with such nonsense. Reading Whitman hidden in my room by candlelight after everyone was asleep was one of the small rebellions of my youth. 3 months after our first meeting, Richard asked my father's permission to court me officially. I was in the sewing room with my mother when I heard them talking in the office. "Ezekiel, I have great admiration for your daughter," said Richard. "I would like your permission to court her, with all respect and seriousness." There was a moment of silence, and then my father's laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh, but that laugh he gave when closing an advantageous deal. "Richard, my boy, you know that Adeline is my most precious possession," he said. "I wouldn't give her to just anyone. But you have the kind of ambition I respect. I see a lot of myself when I was young." I heard the clinking of glasses. They must have been toasting with the special bourbon that my father kept for important occasions. My heart was beating so hard I thought my mother could hear it. She looked at me and smiled, a sad smile that I didn't understand at the time. "Mother, I think Richard is going to ask to court me," I whispered, excited. She took my hand and squeezed it. Her eyes were moist. "Adeline, my child, do you really like him?" "I think so," I answered, confused by her reaction. "He's different. He treats me like a real person." "That's good," she said, but her voice didn't match her words. "Just remember that not everything is what it seems." That night, during dinner, my father announced that Richard had his permission to court me. From then on, he could visit me on Sundays, always in the presence of a family member, as custom dictated. Richard seemed happy. I was nervous but content. And my father had that look of someone who had just closed a good deal. The courtship with Richard was like a dream at the beginning. He would bring me hidden books, tell me about the places he had known when traveling on business, and talk about a future where we could build something together. Always respectful, never crossing the limits of what was considered appropriate at the time. "One day, we'll have our own house," he would tell me. "You can decorate it however you want, plant a garden, maybe even have a small studio for your embroidery." I felt special when I was with him. It was as if, for the first time, someone saw me beyond Ezekiel Montgomery's daughter. I was just Adeline, a young woman with her own desires and dreams. After 6 months of courtship, Richard asked for my hand in marriage. It was on a Sunday afternoon in the garden gazebo. My father had retired into the house, leaving us alone for a few minutes, something extraordinary, which showed how much he approved of Richard. "Adeline," he said, holding my hands, "I don't have much to offer besides my work and my love, but I promise to dedicate my life to making you happy. Will you marry me?" With tears in my eyes, I said yes. At that moment, I believed I was beginning my love story, my chance to finally live my own life, away from my father's suffocating control. The engagement was short, just 3 months. My father wanted a quick wedding, said there was no reason to wait since Richard had a promising future, and I was already of marrying age. I had just turned 18. During the wedding preparations, I began to notice something strange. My father and Richard would spend hours locked in the office, discussing what my father called arrangements for the future. When I asked what they talked about, both would change the subject. "Men's business, my princess," my father would say. "We're ensuring that you'll have all the best." Once, I entered the room without knocking and surprised them leaning over some papers. Richard quickly put them in a leather folder, but not before I saw that they looked like contracts. "We're just working out some details of your dowry, dear," he explained. Dowry? That seemed old-fashioned even by the standards of the time. But I accepted the explanation, blinded by the dream of freedom that marriage seemed to offer. A week before the wedding, I overheard a conversation between my mother and Martha, our cook. "Mrs. Eliza, this ain't right," Martha was saying in a low voice. "That boy Richard is cut from the same cloth as Mr. Ezekiel. It's plain to see he only wants the girl for the money." "I know, Martha," my mother replied, her voice breaking. "But what can I do? Ezekiel has already decided. And maybe Richard will treat Adeline better than—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I knew what she wanted to say, better than my father treated her. That conversation planted a little seed of doubt in my heart. But I was already so involved in the preparations, so eager to start my new life, that I pushed that fear to the back of my mind. The wedding was set for the first Saturday of December 1970. It would be the biggest event Charleston had ever seen, as my father made a point of telling everyone. And it would be the beginning of the nightmare that would change my life forever. The day of my wedding dawned with a clear blue sky, not a cloud in sight, as if even the weather wanted to cooperate with my father's plans. St. John's Episcopal Church was decorated with so many flowers that it looked more like a garden than a church. White lilies, roses, orchids, all imported because my father insisted on the best. My dress was a dream of French lace and pure silk, with a train so long that it needed 2 little girls to carry it. It had been ordered from New York, from a dressmaker who only served high society. As I got ready in the room, with my mother and 2 women hired just to do my hair and makeup, I felt like a fairy tale princess. "You look beautiful, my child," my mother said, adjusting my veil. Her eyes were teary, but there was something in them beyond the natural emotion of a mother at her daughter's wedding. There was concern, perhaps even fear. "Remember that you can always come back home if you need to." I didn't really understand what she meant. Come back for what? I was about to start my real life away from my father's control. It was everything I had always dreamed of. The ceremony was grand, with more than 400 guests. The Bishop of Atlanta came especially to celebrate, a favor my father had managed through his connections. The church was so full that some people had to stay outside. When I walked down the center aisle, arm in arm with my father, I felt all eyes on me. "You're the most beautiful bride Charleston has ever seen," my father whispered, gripping my arm possessively. "I did all this for you, my princess." At the altar, Richard waited, elegant in his dark suit. He smiled when he saw me, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. At the time, I attributed this to the nervousness of the moment. Only later would I understand the true meaning. After the ceremony, the reception was at the most exclusive club in the city, with an orchestra brought from Atlanta, French champagne, and a banquet that included everything from regional dishes to imported delicacies. My father circulated among the guests, receiving congratulations as if the day were more his than mine. "Ezekiel, you've outdone yourself," I heard the mayor say. "This wedding will go down in Charleston history." "Nothing is too much for my princess," my father replied, but the tone was of a man talking about a successful investment, not his daughter. Richard and I hardly had any time together during the party. He was always talking with some businessman, and I was surrounded by ladies giving me advice on how to be a good wife. "The secret is to always do what he wants," one of them told me, winking. "A happy man means a peaceful home." My father's gift to us was a honeymoon in Aspen, Colorado. "You'll love it," he said. "I've reserved the best suite at the most exclusive hotel. Mountain cold, fireplace lit, all romantic-like in an American movie." We left the party straight for the Charleston airport, where a plane was waiting for us for the first part of the journey. I changed from my wedding dress into a navy blue traveling outfit, and Richard seemed anxious to leave. I noticed that he and my father exchanged a few private words before we left, and my father handed him a thick envelope, which Richard quickly tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket. "What's that?" I asked when we were already in the car. "Just some documents for our return," he vaguely replied. "Your father thinks of everything." The trip was long and tiring. First the flight to Denver, then another to Aspen. I arrived exhausted, but enchanted by the beauty of the mountain town, so different from the warm, humid climate of Georgia. The hotel was a chalet in European style, with dark wood and flowers in the windows. The suite that my father had reserved occupied the entire top floor, with views of the gardens and the mountains in the background. It had a stone fireplace, a huge bed covered with a feather quilt, and even a marble bathtub large enough for 2 people. "It's like a palace," I remarked, amazed. "Only the best for Ezekiel Montgomery's Little Princess," Richard replied, but there was a tone in his voice that bothered me. It was as if he were repeating a rehearsed phrase. The first 2 nights were magical, as I had dreamed. Richard was gentle and patient with me, understanding my natural nervousness of a young woman raised with the rigid values of the time. We toured the town during the day, dined in romantic restaurants by candlelight, and at night, in his arms, I felt for the first time what it was like to be loved as a woman. On the morning of the 3rd day, I woke up alone in bed. I found Richard on the balcony, speaking quietly on the phone. When he saw me, he quickly ended the call. "Good morning, my wife," he said, kissing me on the forehead. "Sleep well?" "Who were you talking to?" I asked, curious. "Business." Even on honeymoon, some things can't wait. That seemed strange to me. What business would be so urgent as to interrupt our honeymoon? But I didn't question further. After all, he was the man of the house now, and I had been raised to respect my husband's decisions. That day, Richard suggested we stay at the hotel instead of going out to tour. "It's cold out there, and we have this wonderful suite all to ourselves," he argued. "Besides, I've ordered a special lunch to be served here." In the afternoon, he opened a bottle of wine and served me a glass. "A toast to our future, Adeline," he said, touching his glass to mine. I noticed his eyes were different. There was tension there, as if he were nervous about something. After the second glass, I began to feel strange. I wasn't used to drinking, and the wine seemed stronger than normal. My head felt light, and I had the sensation that the room was spinning a little. "Richard, I think the wine made me sick," I commented, holding onto the edge of the table. "It's normal, darling. You're not used to it," he replied, helping me sit on the sofa near the fireplace. "Rest a little. I have a surprise for you later." I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes again, the sky seen through the window was already darkening. Richard was sitting in an armchair in front of me, observing me with a serious expression I had never seen before. "Sleep well?" he asked, but there was no affection in his voice. "Yes, but—" "I feel strange," I replied, trying to get up. My legs were weak. "What was in that wine, Richard?" He smiled, a cold smile I didn't recognize. "Just a mild sedative, my love, to make you more relaxed for our conversation." It was then that I noticed the leather folder on the table, the same one he had quickly hidden when I surprised him with my father. It was open, and I could see several papers inside. "What conversation?" I asked, feeling a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the Aspen climate. "About the future of our business," he replied, emphasizing the word business in a way that gave me chills. "Your father was very generous with your dowry, you know? But there's a special condition we need to fulfill." At that moment, I heard a knock on the suite door. Richard stood up, adjusted his jacket, and walked to the door with a calmness that scared me even more. "Ah, and our visitor has already arrived." "Visitor? What visitor?" My voice came out weak, almost a whisper. When Richard opened the door, I felt my blood freeze. There, standing in the hallway with a smile I knew all too well, was my father. "Daddy, what are you doing here?" I asked, confused and scared. My father entered the room as if he owned the place. He wore an expensive suit, his hair impeccably combed, and carried a leather briefcase in his hand. He approached me, leaned down, and kissed my forehead, as he did when I was a child. "I've come to bring a special gift for you both, my princess," he said, opening the briefcase on the table. Inside were stacks of money, more money than I had ever seen together. Richard approached, took the leather folder that was on the table, and opened it completely. He took out a document with several pages and handed it to my father, along with a pen. "As we agreed, Ezekiel," he said, in a business tone I had never heard before, "all within the parameters we discussed." My father signed the document without even reading it, with the practice of someone who closes deals every day. Then he took the check that was inside the folder and handed it to Richard. $1 million, my father said, and the amount shocked me. It was an absurd fortune for the time. "As promised, you fulfilled your part, now it's my turn." Richard took the check, examined it for a moment, and smiled. A smile that I finally understood, the smile of a man who had just closed the deal of his life. "The room next door is reserved for you, sir," he said to my father. "Make yourself comfortable. I'm going down to have a drink at the bar. I'll return when appropriate." My father nodded, as if that were perfectly normal. "Thank you, my son-in-law. I knew I had chosen the right man for my Adeline." It was only when Richard took his jacket and headed for the door that the reality of the situation began to hit me. I tried to get up, but my legs were still weak because of whatever he had put in my wine. "Richard, what's happening? Where are you going?" I asked, my voice trembling. He stopped at the door and looked back, first at me, then at my father. "I'm going to leave you two alone for a few hours," he replied, as if he were commenting on the weather. "It's part of our business agreement," and he left, closing the door behind him. I heard the click of the key turning in the lock. I was left alone in the room with my father, and the look he gave me made my heart stop. It wasn't the look of a father for his daughter. It was the look of a man for a commodity he had just bought. What happened in the following hours is something that, even after so many years, still cost me to talk about. My own father, the man who should protect me, showed his true face that night. What he always called father's love revealed itself to be a sick obsession. The words he whispered, the way he touched me, every minute was as if a part of my soul was being torn away. "You've always been mine, Adeline," he would say, with that voice I had known since childhood, but which now sounded like the voice of a monster. "That boy is just a detail, a business arrangement. Deep down, you'll always be my little princess." I cried, begged him to stop, but the sedative that Richard had put in the wine still left me weak, unable to fight. My mind tried to disconnect from what was happening, to escape to some distant place where I was still just an innocent girl running through the yard of the house in Georgia. "Why, Daddy?" I managed to ask between sobs. "Why?" "Because you're my masterpiece, my creation," he replied, as if that explained everything. "I raised you to be perfect. No man will ever be worthy of you, not even this Richard, but he understands business, and it was a good deal for everyone." When it finally ended, he dressed calmly, fixed his hair in the mirror as if he were preparing for a business meeting, and walked to the door. "Don't worry about what happened here," he said, standing at the door. "It's our special secret. Richard doesn't need to know the details. He fulfilled his part, received the payment, and now you can go on with your lives. I'll return to Charleston early tomorrow. Be happy, my princess." And he left, leaving behind only the echo of his footsteps in the corridor and the smell of his expensive cologne that always made me nauseous after that day. I was left alone in the room, feeling dirty, broken, betrayed in every possible way. The sedative was beginning to lose its effect, and with a clearer mind came the full pain of understanding. My own husband had sold me to my father, like merchandise, like an object. I dragged myself to the bathroom and stayed under the shower for hours, the hot water scalding my skin, but the feeling of filth wouldn't go away. I scrubbed so hard that my skin turned red and raw, but nothing seemed enough. Wrapped in a towel, I returned to the room and looked out the window. Down below, the lights of Aspen twinkled in the cold mountain night. Normal people living normal lives, without imagining the horror happening in that seemingly idyllic chalet. I thought about breaking the window and jumping, ending it all at once. The fall from the top floor would certainly be fatal. I even opened the window, feeling the cold night wind. I looked down, calculating the distance. It would be quick, at least. A second of courage, and it would all be over. The pain, the humiliation, the terrible future that awaited me as the wife of a man who had sold me at the first opportunity. It was at this moment, when I was about to climb onto the windowsill, that I heard laughter coming from the garden. I looked down, and there they were, my father and Richard, sitting at a table on the hotel restaurant's terrace, drinking whiskey and laughing like old friends. They were toasting, patting each other on the back, celebrating their successful deal. Something changed inside me at that instant. The despair that was leading me to suicide transformed into something different, something cold and determined that I had never felt before. Anger. No, more than anger. Hatred. A crystalline, icy hatred that cleared my mind like pure water. They were laughing at my misery, celebrating while I contemplated death. But I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I wouldn't let them destroy me completely. I closed the window and went back inside. With hands still trembling, but a strangely calm mind, I began to think. If I wanted to survive, not just continue breathing, but really live, I would need to be smarter than them. I would need to use against them the same weapons they used against me: dissimulation and patience. When I heard the key turn in the door, hours later, I was already lying in bed, pretending to sleep. Richard entered, staggering slightly, smelling of whiskey and cigars. I felt the mattress sink when he lay down beside me, without even bothering to take a shower. "I know you're awake," he muttered. "No need to pretend. Business is business, Adeline. Your father paid very well. Now we're rich, and he had his farewell. Everybody won." I remained motionless, controlling my breathing to appear asleep. He sighed and turned to the other side. "As you wish. Tomorrow will be a new day. Your father returns to Charleston, and we go on with our life. We'll be happy in our own way, you'll see." When I was sure he was deeply asleep, his heavy snoring was unmistakable, I got up silently. I searched his jacket, thrown over a chair. In the inside pocket, I found what I was looking for: the $1 million check signed by my father. I observed it for a moment, that piece of paper that represented the price of my dignity. Then I carefully examined the contract that was in the leather folder. What I read there confirmed my worst fears. It wasn't just an agreement for that night. Richard had literally bought control of my father's business with the promise to share me whenever my father desired. It was a sales contract disguised as a commercial agreement, with clauses that, between the lines, reduced me to property to be used according to their convenience. Carefully, so as not to make noise, I made a copy of the check and some key pages of the contract using the portable copying machine that Richard always took on business trips. I hid the copies in the lining of my toiletry bag, where I knew he would never look. Then I put the originals back exactly where they were. The next morning, when I woke up, Richard was already up, having coffee on the balcony, as if nothing had happened. My father had left early, leaving only a note. "It was a pleasure doing business with you. See you soon." "Sleep well, darling?" Richard asked, smiling like the perfect husband he pretended to be. I forced a trembling smile. "Yes, I'm just a little tired." "Natural," he replied, serving me a cup of coffee. "It was an intense night, but now it's past. We have a bright future ahead." During the rest of the honeymoon, a week that seemed to last years, I played the role of the submissive and confused wife. I let Richard think I was in shock, too traumatized to question what had happened. In truth, every minute of those days was dedicated to planning my escape. At night, when he slept, I would write in a coded diary using a system I had invented with my friend Caroline in school days. I detailed everything that had happened, recorded dates, times, exact words that were said. I knew I would need this information later. On our last night in Aspen, Richard wanted to celebrate with champagne. We were on the suite's balcony, the city lights twinkling below, and he seemed genuinely happy. "A toast to our future," he said, raising his glass. "We'll be very rich, Adeline. Your father practically handed me control of the mills. In a few years, when he retires, I'll take over everything." I toasted with him, smiling docilely, while inside I swore that he would never see this future he imagined. "And what happened here? That night," he continued, avoiding looking directly at me, "was just a business arrangement. Your father is a peculiar man, but now we're done with that. He has his own diversions in Charleston." Those words gave me a chill. Other women in Charleston? Other young women being abused by my father? This only strengthened my determination. "I understand," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "Business is business, isn't it?" He seemed relieved by my apparent acceptance. "Exactly. You're an intelligent woman, Adeline. I knew you would understand." That night, while he slept, I made one last note in my diary. "They think they broke me, that I'm just a porcelain doll they can pass from hand to hand. But I'll show them I'm made of steel, and when my revenge comes, it will be cold and complete." The next morning, we departed back to Georgia. To everyone who saw us at the airport, we were just a newlywed couple returning from honeymoon. No one could imagine the horrors that hid behind our practiced smiles, nor the plan that was beginning to take shape in my mind. We returned to Charleston in mid-December 1970. Richard had bought a large house in the most upscale neighborhood of the city, not far from my parents' house. It was a 2-story mansion with a huge garden and swimming pool, the kind of house many people dreamed of having. To me, it was just a prettier prison. The first few months were a nightmare disguised as a fairy tale. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple, the young and promising businessman and his beautiful wife. Richard would show me off at social events like a trophy, while my father watched us from afar with that satisfied smile of someone who closed a good deal. At home, Richard expected me to be the perfect wife, always well-dressed, always smiling, managing the house and organizing dinners for his business contacts. At night, he treated me as his property, something he had bought and could use as he pleased. And sometimes, perhaps once a month, my father would visit when Richard conveniently went out to resolve pending matters. These were the nights I feared most, when I needed all my strength not to go crazy, to completely dissociate from what was happening, imagining myself somewhere else, with another life. But on the outside, I maintained the facade. I would smile at events, wear the expensive jewelry Richard gave me, make small talk with the wives of other businessmen. No one suspected the hell I was living, or perhaps some suspected, but preferred not to see, as my own mother had done all those years. During all this time, I continued my silent plan. I kept the copies of the documents in a secret compartment I made in the bottom of a clothes drawer. I continued writing in my coded diary, recording dates, times, details, and most importantly, I began to inform myself. Using the excuse of shopping or visiting friends, I would go to the public library and read everything I could about laws, especially those related to abuse and violence against women. It wasn't easy to find information at the time. We were in the 70s, in the midst of conservative times, and many of these subjects were taboo. But little by little, I gathered knowledge. The turning point happened in June 1971, when we had been married for 6 months. Richard and my father were becoming more confident, more careless. On a Thursday night, after one of the meetings with my father, I heard the two of them talking in the office while I was supposedly in the bath. "She's obedient, isn't she?" my father asked, laughing. "She's always been my perfect little princess." "Like a doll," Richard replied. Does everything we tell her without questioning. It was a great investment. And business? How are the mills doing? Better than ever. That contract we signed in Aspen gave us total control. In 2 years, we'll double the profits. And then? My father asked, with a voice that gave me chills. Then, Richard hesitated for a moment. Well, accidents happen, don't they? Especially with fragile young women like Adeline. Depression, 1 pill too many. You understand. They were planning to kill me. When I was no longer useful, when they had extracted everything they could from me and the family business, I would be discarded like a broken object. At that moment, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to act. The next morning, when Richard left for a meeting at the mill, I picked up the phone and called the only person I felt I could trust. Caroline Whitaker, my friend from school days. She had moved to Atlanta after marrying a doctor, and we rarely saw each other. Adeline, what a surprise, she exclaimed upon hearing my voice. How's married life? Caroline, my voice was trembling. I need your help. It's a matter of life and death. There was silence on the other end of the line, and then she replied, seriously, Tell me where and when. We arranged to meet 2 days later at a small ice cream parlor in Atlanta. I told Richard I was going to visit a sick aunt in Savannah, an aunt who didn't exist. He didn't even question it, too confident in his control over me. The trip to Atlanta was tense. At every moment, I feared that Richard would discover my lie, that he would follow me, that someone would recognize me. But I arrived without problems and found Caroline waiting for me at the ice cream parlor, as agreed. She had changed little since school days. She still had those lively, intelligent eyes, that direct way of speaking. But I immediately noticed that she perceived the change in me. Her eyes widened a little when she saw me enter. My God, Adeline, what happened to you? She asked, as soon as we sat in a secluded corner. It was then that I broke down. For the first time since that night in Aspen, I allowed myself to really cry, to release all the pain and horror I had kept inside. Between sobs, I told her everything: the arranged marriage, the honeymoon, the macabre agreement, the continued abuse, the plans I had overheard. Caroline listened to everything in silence, holding my hands across the table, her knuckles white from the force. When I finished, her eyes were full of tears, but there was something else in them, a fierce determination. Adeline, what they did, it's monstrous and criminal. Do you have proof? I opened my purse and showed her the copies of the check and the contract, as well as some pages from my coded diary, which only she would know how to read. My husband, she said, after examining the documents, besides being a doctor, has a brother who is a lawyer in Nashville, Dr. Benjamin Whitaker. He specializes in human rights, works with difficult cases that no one else wants to take. I'm going to call him right now. 2 hours later, we were in Dr. Benjamin's office in Nashville. He was a man in his 40s, with kind but determined eyes. He listened to me with professional attention, examining each document I brought, making detailed notes. Mrs. Harrington, he said finally, what happened to you is absolutely criminal. This contract, disguised as a commercial agreement, is actually a document that proves sexual exploitation, false imprisonment, and other very serious crimes. The check, along with your testimony and diary, forms a set of compelling evidence. And what can we do? I asked, a thread of hope being born for the first time in months. File a formal complaint. It will be a difficult process, I won't lie. Your father and your husband are powerful men with connections. But this case is so shocking that, if conducted correctly, it can bring down their empire. Will I have to testify? Face them in court? I asked, feeling the fear return. Eventually, yes. But before that, we need to ensure your safety. You cannot return to that house. But if I don't return, they'll suspect. They might destroy evidence, flee. Dr. Benjamin thought for a moment. You're right. We need to act strategically. Return as if nothing had happened, but be prepared. In exactly 1 week, we'll file the complaint and simultaneously remove you from that house with police protection. That was the plan we followed. I returned to Charleston, to that house I hated, to the arms of the man who had sold me. I pretended normalcy for 7 more days. They were the longest days of my life. The night before the complaint, while Richard slept, I gathered in a small suitcase the only things I wanted to take: some simple clothes, photos of my childhood with my mother, and of course, all the original evidence I had kept. The next morning, Richard left for work as usual. He kissed me on the forehead, said he'd be back for dinner, and asked me to wear that blue dress he liked, because my father would be visiting us. As soon as he left, I called the number Dr. Benjamin had given me. "I'm ready," was all I said. An hour later, a police car and a private car stopped in front of the house. Dr. Benjamin and a social worker got out of the car. The maid, Nancy, widened her eyes when she saw the police officers. "Mrs. Harrington, what's happening?" "Nancy, I need you to stay calm. I'm leaving this house and never coming back. If you want what's yours, take it now and come with me. It's not safe to stay here when my husband finds out what I did." She didn't hesitate. In 10 minutes, she had a bag with her belongings. "You've always been good to me," she said. "I'll go with you." We got into Dr. Benjamin's car and set off for Nashville. On the way, he explained that the complaint was already being filed in the court of justice. Police officers were on their way to the mill to arrest Richard, and others would go to my parents' house to arrest my father. "And now?" I asked, looking out the window as we left Charleston behind. "Now your new life begins, Mrs. Harrington," he replied. "It won't be easy. There's a long process ahead, but you're free from them, forever." At that moment, looking at the Georgia landscape passing by the window, I felt a peace I hadn't known since childhood. For the first time in years, I could breathe without fear. The future was uncertain, but it was mine, just mine. And that's how, my dears, at 18 years old, I began my life for the second time. A life built on the ruins of the previous one, but which, over time, would become something I never imagined possible. A real life. Oh, my dears, that legal process was long and painful, but worth every tear shed. It lasted almost 2 years, with hearings that seemed endless. I had to relive everything, tell details I'd rather forget. But Dr. Benjamin was by my side every step of the way, guiding me like a guardian angel. Richard and my father hired the best lawyers in Georgia, tried to use their influences, tried to discredit me, saying I was unbalanced, ungrateful, a liar. But the evidence was too strong. The check, the contract, my coded diary that Dr. Benjamin managed to validate with the help of experts. And most importantly, my testimony. The trial ended in 1973 with both convicted to several years in prison. It was a scandal that shook the entire state. The mills and properties were confiscated, and much of it was awarded to me as compensation, although I didn't want anything that came from them. I donated almost everything to institutions supporting women victims of violence. After the trial, I decided to stay in Nashville. I couldn't live in Charleston anymore, where every corner brought me painful memories. With the little money I kept from the compensation, I rented a small apartment and enrolled in college to study psychology. Yes, at 21, I finally realized my dream of studying. It was like breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. During college, I met William, a literature professor who taught at the same campus. He was different from all the men I had met, kind, respectful, patient. Our love grew slowly, carefully. He knew about my story, my case had been in the newspapers, and never pressured me, always respecting my time, my fears, my scars. We married in 1976, in a simple ceremony, just with close friends. I was 23, and for the first time, I felt I was really choosing my path. William supported me in everything, in my studies, in my career as a psychologist, in my struggles. Together, we founded a small support center for women victims of domestic violence in Nashville. It was my way of transforming my pain into something positive for other women. In 1978, our daughter Emily was born. Oh, what joy that little girl brought to our lives. Taking care of her, seeing her grow up free and strong, was the greatest blessing I received. I swore she would never know the kind of control and abuse that marked my youth. And I kept that promise. We lived in Nashville for almost 20 years. It was there that I built my career, my family, my new life. Emily grew up, studied, became an independent woman. She graduated in law, following somewhat in Dr. Benjamin's footsteps, who became a great family friend and her godfather. In 1995, when Emily was already in university, we received news that my mother was very ill. Cancer, already in an advanced stage. Even with all the pain I carried from Charleston, I couldn't abandon her at that moment. So William and I temporarily moved to Savannah, which was closer to Charleston, but without the direct memories that haunted me. My mother passed away 6 months later. In her last days, we finally talked about everything that had happened. She asked for my forgiveness for not protecting me, for staying silent in the face of my father's abuse. "I was a prisoner too, Adeline," she said. "I didn't have your courage." I forgave her, of course. How could I not forgive someone who was also a victim, just in a different way? After her passing, we decided to stay in Savannah. William got a position at the State University, and I transferred my work as a psychologist there. The city enchanted me with its historic squares, its slower pace than Nashville, and the possibility of starting over once more. In 2002, our Emily gave us the most precious gift, Lily, our granddaughter. She was born right here in Savannah, where Emily settled after marrying James, an environmental engineer she met during a university project. Seeing my granddaughter grow up was like witnessing a daily miracle. Lily studied hard, always determined, and was the first in the family to attend a university outside the South. She studied medicine at Johns Hopkins. On the day of her graduation, 3 years ago, I cried like a child. It was the realization not only of her dream, but of a cycle of liberation that began with me. My William passed away 5 years ago, a sudden heart attack while he slept. It was an immense pain, still is. But we had almost 5 decades of true love, respect, and companionship. He taught me that not all men are like my father or Richard, that there is kindness, there is genuine love. Today at 72, I live in this simple house in Pensacola, with a view of the Gulf waters. I do my crochet, watching the sunrise every morning, thankful for another day. Emily lives nearby, comes to visit me almost every day with her husband. Lily is doing her residency in Baltimore, but calls me religiously every week, and during vacations comes to stay with me. The afternoons I spend at the market selling my crochet are moments of joy. I chat with tourists, tell stories, not all of them, of course, and feel that each piece I make carries a little bit of my history. Each stitch is like a moment in life, some tight, others looser, but all necessary to form the final design. I never heard directly from my father or Richard again. I know both served their sentences and were eventually released. I heard that my father died many years ago, alone and bankrupt. Richard, from what I learned, left Georgia after prison. But honestly, I don't care. They no longer have power over me. They don't occupy space in my thoughts. Life taught me that we are stronger than we imagine, especially in moments when we think we're going to break, and that there is always, always a path to freedom, even when all doors seem closed. My dear viewers, if you're going through something similar to what I went through, I want to say from the bottom of my heart, you are not alone, and what is happening to you is not your fault, never was and never will be. Those who should protect us sometimes are the ones who hurt us the most. I understood this in the most painful way, but I also learned that there is always a way out, even when all doors seem locked. Sometimes the exit is a small window we hadn't noticed before, or a door we need to build with our own hands. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to start over each day. At 18, when I fled that house in Charleston, I thought my life had ended before it really began. But I was wrong. It was just the beginning of a journey different from what I had imagined. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. When I look in the mirror today, I don't see a victim. I see a survivor, a woman who faced her monsters and, although she has scars, is here to tell her story. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. Even in the darkest moments in that hotel room in Aspen, there was a spark in me that refused to die. It's that spark that we all have, and that no one can extinguish unless we allow it. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. They took my body, my temporary freedom, but my essence, who I really was, this they never managed to touch. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. That night, when I saw my husband and my father toasting my misfortune, I could have given up. I was on the edge of the abyss, literally, but something in me chose to fight, and that choice changed everything. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. I still have nightmares sometimes. There are still days when the memories come back strongly. But I've learned not to let these moments define my days, my life. My story isn't about what they did to me, but about how I chose to respond. I chose to seek help. I chose to report. I chose to rebuild my life. And each of these choices made me stronger. My dear viewers watching from all corners of America and the world, I need you to do something very important right now. If this story touched your heart, if you know someone who is trapped in an abusive situation, please subscribe and activate the notification bell. It may seem like a simple thing, but each subscription helps this message reach further, to reach someone who may need to hear exactly this right now. And just for the few people who managed to watch me attentively until now, leave in the comments the word strength. I want to know all the dear ones who really sympathized with me on this journey. A hug to all of you, love from my heart, and see you next time.